Story 1. My first big skiing trip was with my buddies Mark, Tyler, and Rachel. We all decided to fly out to Colorado for an adventure in the snow. We rented a beautiful Airbnb in Snowmass, just a stone's throw from Aspen Mountain Ski Resort. I had only gone snowboarding once before in my life, and that was limited to endlessly falling down the bunny hill. To say I was inexperienced would be an understatement. After landing at the airport, we grabbed an Uber straight to the Airbnb. The place was fantastic, 4 bedrooms, a huge deck with a hot tub, and an incredible view of the Colorado countryside. Since it was already nighttime when we arrived, we decided to hit up a local bar that evening. It was a Thursday, and the energy in town was just right, exciting but not overly crowded. The next morning, we took another Uber to the mountain and got our rental equipment right there. It was convenient, though a little hectic. Surprisingly, it was not too busy on that Friday, probably because most people were still at work. The next day was a different story. The slopes were packed. I could not seem to get the hang of snowboarding no matter how hard I tried. Every attempt to make it down a slope ended with me on the ground. At one point, frustration got the best of me, and I plopped myself down on the side of the run to catch my breath. People zipped past me effortlessly, even kids half my age making it look like second nature. While I sat there feeling sorry for myself, a guy who was struggling just as much as me slid over and asked if I was okay. He struck up a conversation, which felt so random given we were sitting in the snow on a busy slope. After a few awkward exchanges, I told him it was nice chatting but got back on my board to try again. This particular slope was a blue run, longer and slightly harder than the beginner greens. It was challenging, but I was determined. A little further down, I stopped again for another break, and, to my disbelief, the same guy approached me. He was inching down the mountain with the same unsteady movements I had been making. He sat a few feet away, unstrapped his snowboard, and started talking again. This time, he made some weird comment about not seeing many pretty girls on the slopes. The odd part? I was completely covered, ski mask, helmet, everything. My face was barely visible. He asked who I was with, and I lied, saying I was there with my boyfriend. He laughed, claiming he had seen me arrive with my friends. Feeling beyond uncomfortable, I looked at him, said "Ew" loudly, and hopped back on my snowboard. Somehow, the adrenaline of the moment gave me the boost I needed, and I rode better than I had all day, finally making it to the bottom of the run. At the lodge, I found a table and immediately called Rachel. She picked up quickly, and I told her what had happened, asking her to come sit with me. Within minutes, she was there, and I had already texted our group chat suggesting we leave soon. By then, it was already 3 in the afternoon, and we had been on the mountain for hours. Mark and Tyler joined us shortly after finishing their last run. We returned our gear and caught an Uber back to the Airbnb. That evening, we all cleaned up and headed out to the village for dinner. The food was amazing, and afterward, we hit up a few bars, getting just the right amount of buzzed. Back at the Airbnb, we decided to make the most of the hot tub on the deck. We poured some drinks, laughed about the day's events, and let the warm water melt away the cold. After a while, we each retreated to our rooms to sleep. I have always struggled with insomnia, so I ended up scrolling on TikTok for over an hour while still feeling a little buzzed. What happened next might have been pure luck or a blessing in disguise. As I lay there, I suddenly heard faint footsteps in the common area, either the kitchen or living room. The wood floors in the house made every sound distinct, and it was enough to grab my attention. At first, I figured the footsteps were just Rachel or Mark getting up for water or heading to the bathroom. But then I heard the doorknob to my room rattling, and something about it felt off. I sat up, ready to call out one of their names, but I stopped myself. Why would one of them be trying to come into my room in the middle of the night? My gut told me something was not right. I grabbed my phone and quickly texted our group chat, asking who was outside my door. No one responded. Everyone must have been sound asleep. I crept to the door, holding my breath, and pressed my ear against it. The footsteps were still there, moving around in the common area. When the noise quieted, I unlocked my door as silently as I could and cracked it open just enough to peek out. My heart nearly stopped when I spotted a tall, dark silhouette moving across the living room. It was a man. He was going from door to door, testing each doorknob. I froze, my thoughts racing. I wanted to shout a warning to my friends but stayed silent, terrified that he might come after me next. Slowly, I closed the door and locked it. I whispered a prayer that everyone else had locked their doors, too. With 4 of us girls in an Airbnb, it seemed likely we had. I dialed 911, keeping my voice to a whisper as I explained the situation. The operator stayed calm and told me help was on the way. That was when I heard the faint knocks on my door. My eyes darted toward the sound, and I watched in horror as the doorknob twisted again. The lock held firm, but my fear only grew. I whispered urgently into the phone, "Please, hurry." The operator reassured me, saying, "They are almost there. Stay quiet and stay safe." It felt like the man outside the door could hear me. He began shoving and banging against it, testing its strength. Panic took over, and I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Get out of here. I am on the phone with the police right now." The banging stopped. A deep voice on the other side replied, "Okay, sweetheart," in the most chilling tone I have ever heard. Then, I heard footsteps retreating into the house. The operator instructed me to stay put until the police arrived. I crept over to the window, trying to catch a glimpse of what was happening outside, but the night was pitch black. All I could see was a shadowy blur a few feet beyond the glass. By now, my screams had woken everyone else. I told them through the group chat to stay in their rooms and lock their doors. Nobody dared come out. It felt like an eternity, but within 5 or 10 minutes, the police arrived. They entered the Airbnb quickly since the front door had been left unlocked. After sweeping the house and confirming the intruder was gone, they helped us secure every door and window before leaving. We were safe, but none of us felt at ease. Sleep was impossible after that. The next morning, we pieced everything together. The idea that it might have been the creepy guy from the slopes came up, and honestly, it seemed plausible. His voice had that same unsettling tone, and the coincidence was just too much to ignore. After discussing it with the Airbnb host, we got a partial refund and decided not to risk staying there another night. Instead of snowboarding, we spent Sunday exploring the local area, trying to distract ourselves. That evening, we checked into a small motel, where we felt a bit safer. Early Monday morning, we boarded our flight home. Even now, I cannot shake the memory of that voice on the other side of the door or the eerie feeling of being watched. It is a story I will never forget. Story 2. When I was a kid, my dad used to say something that stuck with me. He would tell me, "Do not waste your fear on ghosts. Be afraid of the living, they are the ones who can hurt you." Those words meant more to me than ever during one of the strangest and scariest experiences of my life. I was in my late teens when my dad passed away. He took his own life, and it shattered everything I knew. As hard as it was, I inherited some money after his death. At the time, he and my mom owned a small cabin up in Oregon near Mount Bachelor. The place was beautiful, surrounded by forests and mountains, but my mom could no longer afford to keep it. Renting it out had not been enough to cover the payments, so she decided to sell it. The cabin was about to go on the market, and all the paperwork with the realtor and lawyers was nearly finalized. For about a month, though, the cabin was going to sit vacant, no renters, no guests, just an empty, quiet space in the woods. I saw it as an opportunity to escape everything that had been weighing me down. I quit my job, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my black lab, Max, and loaded up my dad's old car. I needed to clear my head, and I figured the cabin was the perfect place to do it. The first 2 days there were uneventful. I spent my mornings playing with Max in the snow and snowboarding, and my evenings were spent lounging in the living room, playing old DVDs or messing around on my gaming console. I had stocked up on everything I needed before heading out, plenty of food, cigarettes, and some whiskey to keep me company. With Max by my side, I felt like I had all the time in the world to just unwind. The cabin itself was a simple 2-story setup. Downstairs had a cozy living room, a guest bedroom I never used, and a small kitchen. Upstairs, there were 2 more bedrooms, including the master, which had a walkout balcony overlooking the forest. I spent most of my time in the living room or the master bedroom. The other rooms? I kept their doors closed and never went inside. I was not scared of them or anything, I just had no reason to use them. On the 3rd day, the snow started coming down heavy. I decided to stay in rather than risk heading out to the slopes. I stuck to my usual routine, playing with Max, watching movies, and trying to distract myself. By midday, I took Max outside to let him run around a bit. That was when I noticed something strange. There were footprints in the snow near the cabin. They were fresh enough that they could not have been more than half an hour old, even with the snow falling. I thought maybe someone was staying in one of the 2 cabins near ours, but as far as I knew, those places had been empty for days. The prints led away from the cabin and disappeared into the thick pine forest beyond. I stared at them for a while, debating what to do, but eventually I shrugged it off and went back inside. That night, as I lay in bed, Max startled me. His ears perked up, and before I could react, he jumped off the bed and bolted downstairs. My heart started racing, and I froze for a moment, trying to listen. I could hear him pacing back and forth in the living room, his claws clicking on the wood floor. After a few minutes, he came charging back upstairs and began his little, "I need to go out" dance, wagging his tail and staring at me expectantly. All right, let's go," I said, groaning as I got up. We headed downstairs and stepped outside into the icy driveway. I waited for Max to do his thing, but he did not. Instead, he started pulling hard on his leash, trying to drag me toward the edge of the property where the trees grew thick. His nose darted back and forth as he sniffed at the side of the cabin, then he stopped and looked upward. Max kept looking up toward the roof, his ears twitching, but when he realized I was not going to follow him into the trees, he sat down. His eyes stayed fixed on the darkness beyond the edge of the cabin. It was unusual for him to act like that, but I tried to convince myself it was just a raccoon or some other animal out there that had caught his attention. Whatever it was, I was not about to go chasing after it. I gave the leash a gentle tug and led him back inside. We headed upstairs, and I climbed back into bed, hoping to forget about it. About 30 minutes later, just as I was starting to doze off, I heard something on the roof. It was faint but distinct, a series of 6 deliberate steps. At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe a pine cone had fallen or some animal was skittering across the snow-covered shingles. But the sound was different. The steps were spaced apart like a person's stride, not the quick, light scurry of a squirrel or raccoon. Max heard it too. He sprang to his feet and ran to the balcony screen door, wagging his tail and waiting for me to let him out. I sat there, debating what to do. I considered myself a tough guy back then, strong enough to handle whatever might be out there, so I grabbed my coat, shoes, flashlight, and cigarettes. I was determined to figure out what was going on. Stepping out onto the balcony, I lit up a cigarette and scanned the roof with my flashlight. Nothing. The snow was untouched, completely undisturbed. For a moment, I thought maybe it had all been in my head. But Max had heard it too, which made me doubt my own explanation. Maybe he was just feeding off my anxiety, I thought, trying to calm myself down. My breathing slowed, and I started to relax a bit. The night was quiet except for the occasional rustling of the trees, and the stars were bright overhead. Then I saw it. In a tree about 20 feet away from the balcony, something was crouched between two branches. My brain struggled to process what I was looking at. It looked like a man, but impossibly tall, 8 or 9 feet at least, and disturbingly thin. Its long, pale arms were stretched upward, gripping the branch above it. Its body was hunched on the lower branch, its legs folded unnaturally, and its mouth hung wide open in an expressionless gape. The thing did not move. It just sat there. What the hell? I whispered under my breath. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood frozen, unable to look away. Max began pacing behind me, letting out soft, uneasy barks. The thing in the tree remained perfectly still. I thought about shining my flashlight directly at it, but something in my gut screamed at me not to. Slowly, I backed up toward the door, pulling Max along with me. My hands were shaking as I locked the door behind us. Then, against my better judgment, I shined the flashlight toward the tree one more time. It was gone. I quickly shut the curtains, my mind racing. I climbed back into bed, but I could not shake the image of that thing crouched in the tree. A little later, just as I was starting to calm down, I heard a new sound. It was faint at first but grew louder as I focused on it, light tapping on the screen door. The rhythm was steady, like someone gently drumming their fingers on the glass. Max stood at the edge of the bed, staring at the door, but he would not go near it. His usual bravery had vanished. I felt a strange, almost overwhelming urge to open the door, like someone was silently beckoning me. But at the same time, my dad's voice echoed in my head, "Do not be afraid of ghosts. Be afraid of the living." That voice kept me grounded. I stayed in bed, clutching the blankets tightly, refusing to move. The tapping continued for what felt like an eternity, never-changing pace, until eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the curtains. I wasted no time packing my things. The fear from the night before had not faded, and I knew I needed to leave. Within an hour, Max and I were in the car, speeding away from the cabin. I did not look back. Story 3. My family owns a cozy property up in Vermont that we use every winter for skiing and snowboarding. The house sits on top of a steep hill surrounded by thick woods, with the nearest neighbors up the road, far enough that you cannot see their houses from our property. There is a large shed out back where we store all our snowboarding gear and some general tools like shovels, rakes, and other odds and ends. Normally, we keep the shed locked whenever no one is staying there. However, during our visits, we leave it unlocked since we have never worried much about anyone wandering in to take anything. The house itself is a good size. It has 3 levels if you count the loft-style master bedroom on the 3rd floor, which is off-limits to my siblings and me. It is reserved for my parents. This weekend, though, I was headed up to the cabin with my friend Rachel, who had never been snowboarding before. I planned to teach her the basics. Luckily, we had a beginner snowboard at the house, along with all the equipment she would need. The hill on our property was perfect for practicing. It was steep enough to be fun but small enough to be safe. Over the years, we had even carved out a little slope of our own, which we used for sledding and snowboarding. Before heading to the bigger mountain nearby, I figured we could spend some time on our hill so Rachel could get the hang of it. We geared up and climbed to the top of the hill. I went first, demonstrating how to balance and make small turns as I slowly descended. When Rachel gave it a shot, she fell almost immediately, no surprise there. But she was determined. Each time she fell, she got right back up and tried again. After a few runs, she was already improving, though we had to climb back up the hill each time, which made for some tired legs. Then, out of nowhere, we heard a man's voice call out from the woods. It was faint but clear enough to make us stop in our tracks. The voice said, "Hello." Rachel and I exchanged confused looks and scanned the tree line. All we saw were endless rows of bare trees and a blanket of white snow covering the ground. You would think spotting someone in that stark landscape would be easy, but there was no one there. I yelled back, "Is someone there?" Nothing. Just silence. The stillness of winter in a remote area can be eerie, and this was no exception. Rachel and I felt uneasy, so we decided to head back up to the house. I tried to rationalize it, telling her it was probably just some hiker wandering through the woods. That explanation felt safer than any alternative. After that, we went to a diner I liked nearby for some comfort food, then stopped to pick up groceries to last us a few days. By the time we got back, it was already dark, so we stayed in for the rest of the evening. We had dinner and sat out by the fire pit in the backyard, trying to enjoy the quiet. The crackling fire and soft music playing from my phone created a calming atmosphere. Then we heard it, the distinct crunch of footsteps in the snow, close enough to make my heart skip a beat. I immediately turned off the music, and we sat in silence, listening. The sound had stopped. I grabbed both my phone and Rachel's to use the flashlights, shining them into the woods. "Is someone there?" I called out again. Rachel's face went pale, and she tugged on my arm. "Let's just go inside," she said. I did not argue. We headed back into the house and locked the door behind us. Neither of us wanted to go back out that night. The next morning, I woke up briefly when Rachel got out of bed, but I was too tired to stay awake. When I finally got up, the clock read 9 a.m., and Rachel still was not in the room. Thinking she might have gone outside, I opened the curtain to look out the window. That was when I noticed the shed door was open. I stared at it for a moment, and that was when I saw it, puffs of breath escaping from behind the door, visible in the cold morning air. My first thought was that Rachel had gone to grab something from the shed. I opened the window and called her name, but to my surprise, her voice answered from inside the house. "Yeah," she shouted back from the living room. Goosebumps ran down my arms. If Rachel was inside, then who was out there? My eyes stayed fixed on the shed, watching as those clouds of breath kept puffing out from behind the door. My voice shook as I yelled, "Hey! Who is in my shed?" The breathing stopped, and after a few tense seconds, I slammed the window shut. I slammed the window shut and bolted out to the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. Rachel was standing in front of the couch, looking confused and concerned. "What is going on?" she asked. I pointed toward the back door and stammered, "There is someone outside." She followed my gaze, and through the glass, we saw the back of a figure dressed in black sprinting toward the woods. I scrambled to find my boots, but by the time I got them on, the person was long gone. Frustrated and shaken, I headed to the shed to see if anything had been taken. To my relief, everything inside seemed untouched. I locked the shed, double-checking the latch, and stood there for a moment, staring at the footprints in the snow. They led from the woods to the shed and then back again, disappearing into the trees. My gut told me not to follow them. After I calmed down a bit, we decided to try and move on with the day. We had breakfast, then headed to the mountain as planned. Rachel was getting the hang of snowboarding quicker than I expected, and we spent hours out on the slopes. By the time we got back to the house that evening, we were exhausted. We cooked a steak dinner, put on a movie, and stayed inside. Neither of us wanted to go back out into the dark after what had happened earlier. That night, I woke up to Rachel shaking my shoulder. Her voice was low and panicked. "Wake up. Do you hear that?" she asked. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and we both stayed silent, listening. After about 30 seconds, I heard it too, a voice calling out from outside. It was slow and drawn out, like someone in distress. "Help me," it said. Rachel was already on the verge of tears. "What do we do?" she whispered. The voice came again, clearer this time, but no less unsettling. I got up and walked toward the window. Rachel grabbed my arm, pleading, "Do not look. Please, just do not look." "I have to," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I gently lifted the corner of the curtain and peeked out. There was nothing but darkness. I could not see a thing. Hoping to pinpoint where the voice was coming from, I cracked the window open slightly. A blast of cold air hit my face, and I leaned closer, straining to listen. That was when I heard the crunch of footsteps in the snow. They were fast and getting louder, coming straight toward the window. I slammed it shut and locked it just as a loud knock sounded against the glass. My heart stopped. Whoever it was had seen me. I turned to Rachel, who was hiding under a blanket, her faint sobs barely audible. "Do not make a sound," I said firmly. "We cannot let them know we are scared." We sat there in tense silence for what felt like hours. The knocking never came again, and the voice outside went quiet. Eventually, exhaustion got the better of us, and we fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, I woke up early and went outside to check the property. My stomach dropped when I saw the footprints. They surrounded the house, weaving from window to window. Someone, or maybe several people, had been circling the cabin all night. It was clear that whoever had been out there was watching us from the moment we arrived. Rachel and I did not waste any time. We packed our things quickly, locked everything back in the shed, and loaded up the car. As I drove away, I could not shake the feeling of being watched, even as the cabin disappeared from view. For those wondering, nothing was ever stolen or broken into when we returned to the cabin later that season. To this day, I have no idea who that person, or those people, were or what they wanted. But the realization that we were not alone, that someone had been watching us, was enough to make me question ever going back. When you are in a place as remote as that, realizing you are not alone is the most terrifying thing imaginable.